transforming lives. Your transformation starts here.
So when we think about transformation, guys, I did not know that this 50 educators from 50 states will be a such an involved initiative. Well, I'm Tony Kimble. I'm your host, and what I consider just interviewing individuals from 50 states is turned into something just totally different. So I appreciate you stopping right now. If you're on YouTube, hitting that subscribe button to the Tony Kimble TV channel. And then also, if you're listening to this on any podcast station, go ahead and subscribe because this lineup is just wild, right? It's just wild. I have no other way to tell you where I have individuals that are coming in that are just passionate about just education. And in this particular episode, I'm excited about this conversation with my next guest, and how you initially start something is not how you want to finish it. I'm only, I think this may be the fifth person in, and it's 45 more to go. But here's what I'm finding out: conversations from passionate educators make a difference. So I hope as you're listening that you are able to glean something from those individuals, and you're able to take that insight, take the information, and begin to apply it to your everyday life, your craft, and get better. Now, my next guest he's been a teacher, assistant principal, a principal, director of innovation for a district with about 35,000 students. That's a lot. He's also a full-time author, a podcaster, keynote speaker, and he just loves just to help other people get better. My next guest is Mr. Adam Welcome. All right, welcome to the show, Mr. Welcome. How are you?
I'm well, man. Thanks for having me on, dude. It's good to be here.
Yeah. My first introduction to you was on LinkedIn, and being a fresh podcaster, and I saw your information. It was like, all right, like we got to have a conversation at some point in time, and have the courage to step up to ask for that conversation. So I appreciate it.
Hey, man, if you don't ask, you never know, right? It doesn't cost anything to send that DM or to ask somebody, because you never know what's going to happen with one simple ask. So I always encourage everybody, make sure you're asking, because you never know what's going to happen.
That's unique. That's very unique, because here's a quick story as we're getting going. I had a head football coach to tell me that same along those same lines of reaching out to football coaches.
Mhm.
And I took it to the extreme. So I reached out to Dick LeBeau of the Pittsburgh Steelers, literally called him, left a voicemail. He called me back, and we had a brief conversation. Um, and it was something that uniquely changed me. So I'm with you 100%. That sparked the actual thought right there. So, well, great. So when we begin to look at just you as an individual, I have been through your YouTube information. I've been through your website, and I've been picking and choosing. I understand that you have a statement that is very unique of saying, don't spend 25 years. Can you help me out, because it was in my brain right there. You have a statement that you
Yeah,
let
I mean, yeah, I think where you're going is, teach for 25 years, don't teach the same year 25 times. Lead for 10 years, don't lead the same year 10 times. And I think that goes true for anything. I think like in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and maybe like in the 70s, you could probably have the same career and do the same thing, with little nuances and changes during that career for the entirety of the career. And
Right.
why? It's because like there wasn't that much change. I mean, there was obviously, but it wasn't until the 90s and the internet and Google Classroom and Google and cloud computing. And I mean, now we got
Right.
AI. I mean, there's been more change in the last 3 years than there has been probably in the last like 30. And I know I'm talking in generalizations, but I think,
Right.
like on pretty specific things, you have to, and I would say like you get to change. Like, right. Like to
Oh,
me,
yeah,
I
I
mean,
like that.
people didn't know any better. They got up and they went to work and there was little nuances, but it's almost like you got to kind of like change. Like as a former principal, I'm not a principal anymore, but if I was, you almost have to be run a new school every couple of years. Like superintendents almost have to run a new
Right.
district every couple of years. If you're a physician, you almost got to change how you practice every
Right.
couple 2-3 years, right? And now we have AI, which is obviously changing even more at even such a more rapid pace than
Right. Yes.
going to like the cloud and Google Docs and Google Apps and all of that. So it's just don't get comfortable, don't get complacent, because if you do, then you're going to be out of business. And I like to say our schools will always be here, but are they remaining relevant for our kids? Like what we're producing,
Ooh, yeah.
walking across that stage, or just every year as they articulate to the next grade level or school, are we actually getting them ready for the world that they're growing up in, not the world that we grew up in, the world that they're
Mhm.
growing up in? And as you know, man, like it's different. It's completely different and it's changed
Right.
so much, which again makes it exciting. But so much of it is the mindset that we as humans and as individuals and as educators, or whoever
Right.
comes across this podcast, you're not even an
Yeah.
educator. Whatever you do, it's got to be different.
Right. Oh, absolutely. That's something that when you think about transformation, transformation is you may be in this form in the beginning and you're looking to, you know, change in some way. There's a metamorphosis that happens. So that's a good lead off right there. And you've basically touched on this first question of asking you, your experience as, from teaching to school leaders, how has that shaped your educational philosophy? You touched on it a little bit, but can we dive a little deeper into it?
Yeah. So I think I kind of really changed when I was a teacher. So I taught third, fourth, and fifth grade. And I was like 22 years old when I got my first teaching job. Hey, you're 22, you got your degree, you got your credential, here's a class. And I look
Yeah.
back now, man, like I'm 45, like, man, they gave me a class of 30, 10-year-olds. But I remember looking at my students and thinking like, I'm bored and I'm disengaged with what I'm doing to them with them,
Yeah.
like, and like kind of looking around, and I'm like, man, they're going to figure me out. Like I have to be more innovative and more creative.
Yeah.
And so
Correct.
much in life is timing, because the timing of the world, where like we had a computer lab and then iPods came out and I convinced my principal to buy 5 iPods and we thought we were super high tech. And then like the next year,
Right.
Google Apps came out, and man, we got to get off these like no more flash drives, like where you take your class to the computer lab and, you are on computer 17. And if somebody from the class previously deleted all your stuff, like you had to start over. And I
Yeah.
remember thinking, I'm like, man, this is going to be a thing. So I just remember thinking like, man, and then also I feel like educators really need to look outside of the school ecosystem, because schools
Hmm.
sometimes can be 5 years, 10 years behind where, like there's things happening in the world and we're like, oh, cool. And like, they're already like, the world's already on to the next thing. So I always just told myself, when I become a school leader, I'm going to lead that entire school that way, in order to just be relevant and do what's best for kids. And it's going to be more exciting, and it's going to be engaging and not entertaining. And, enrollment's up and attendance is up and discipline and behavior is down. The best discipline program, Antoine, is an engaged classroom. Get kids thinking and talking and problem solving and thinking critically and moving. We can't just give them another worksheet. I never met a kid that
Hmm.
was like, can I have another worksheet, please?
Never.
They don't
Never.
exist. And everybody listening, whatever you do, ask your kids that you had last year, if they're still in your building, ask them, hey, and they're like, oh, hey, like, hey, what was your favorite worksheet that we did last year? they're going to look at you with like, I can't believe they're asking me that question, because it's not a
Right.
memorable experience. Kids remember
Correct.
experiences that they are involved in building with you. I feel like we do way too much to kids. I don't think we do enough with kids. So everybody listening, make sure that the kids are an active participant in what you're doing, because they know things about AI that like the adults don't know. And they know things about just
Right.
technology in general that we don't know. So why would you not use them as a resource? They're literally on technology all day long. They know the ins and outs. And if you don't, that's okay. Be a little bit vulnerable. You
Yep.
are no
Right.
longer the keeper of all the knowledge. The knowledge is just, it's ubiquitous because it's the internet. And there's a really great website called YOUTUBE. And whatever you want to know, you can learn it. So
Right.
stop saying that you don't know it, you haven't been taught. That's not an excuse anymore in this world that we're living in. It's a lie. Stop lying that you don't know how to do something, because anybody can learn how to do basically anything in the world. So go on that journey with your people, with your students, and you're just going to have so much more fun.
Oh, I love it. And here's the unique thing about it. At one point in time in that stages of growing up, I was a gamer. Well, it wasn't called a gamer back then, right? So you had Mortal Kombat, Tecmo Bowl, and all those things. And of course, it is advanced now, where you have Madden. And listening to my son, I have a teenager, and he uses the term AI, and I'm like, "You're playing in the computer." No, it's the AI that did it. I was like,
Mhm.
no, the way we said it back then was it was the computer. So
Mhm.
those little small uh experiences are definitely different, even for parents of,
Yep.
of children that are excelling at this
Yep.
point.
Yep.
Powerful. So when you talk about as a former director of innovation, what strategies have you found most effective in integrating technology? Of course, let me let you know, I love technology. If you can look at my desk right here, I have too much technology. I love it. So, you know what, what are some things you did to integrate technology in the classroom?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, so I was a director of innovation for a fairly large school district. We had like 50 schools, 35,000 students. And I think, when you're working, you have to look at it in a few different categories. There's working with like the parent community, there's working with
Mm,
administrators from like a principal level, and then there's working with teachers. And I feel like,
yeah,
when you're working with teachers, I feel like it can't be like another thing. It's got to make sense. It's got to help them help their students, bring them to a place that the teacher could not have brought those students if they didn't have the technology. It's got to be something transformative and not just a substitution for something that we've always done. I mean, like kind of like take the iPad. Like, I love iPads. I don't love how I've seen them used most of the time, where we just put
mm,
apps on them and kids are just
right,
consuming. All that
yep,
really is, in most cases, it might be a little bit more engaging because it's a technology device, but all it really is a digital worksheet. How is that really transforming the learning experience? So I feel like showing teachers those types of ideas, I think is really important. And it's got to be beyond the cool factor. It's got to make sense. It's got to help students that have an IEP, that are an English learner, that are gifted and talented, because academically that's an at-risk population as well too if they don't reach
right,
their full
yeah,
potential. So how can adults do it with the kids and not to the kids? Because I feel like oftentimes teachers are like, okay, I'm going to plan out an hour lesson and 30 minutes of it is going to be my instruction with
ooh,
the device. And I just say, like, give them a 3-minute little mini lesson on what you want them to learn. Show them something on the device, whatever it might be. If it's a 3D printer, if it's an iPad or Chromebook, if it's a robot that kids have in class that they use in order to help their learning, and then see where they go with it. Because so often I feel like adults try to control thing. Like, don't be a control freak. Don't try to
right,
guide every kid where you think they want them, where you want them to go, because they're going to go to places that you never even thought of. Because if you have 30 students, or if you're in secondary and you have 120 students, they all think and learn a little bit differently. And the
correct,
and the beauty of technology is it allows them to have some freedom and take their learning in a different way. And then you're going to learn along with them. And then if you don't know how to do something, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Go to YouTube, go to Google, ask a 10-year-old and they'll help
Right.
you. But then like the teacher should be like walking around in the classroom to see what's happening. Because if Adam is 3 steps ahead of somebody else and somebody else has a question, teacher listening, don't help the student that has a question. Go find the person, Adam, for this instance, and say, hey, Adam, can you go help that person? Because what that does is that allows the teacher to have a little bit more freedom and flexibility to look at the classroom and support the students in a different way. And then you're also empowering a student that is just a little bit farther ahead of everybody else. And how do they feel? They feel great. You're helping each other and you're building that just collaborative classroom. I just think it's an easy way to get started, to get momentum, to build something that is contagious in the classroom. And the kids are going to hear the bell and they're like, oh my gosh, the period went by so fast. It felt like it went by so fast. Yeah, because they were engaged, because they were thinking and problem solving and critically thinking. They weren't just working on a packet or a worksheet or building a diorama or a mobile. 1985 wants their dioramas back. And when you're talking about video games, I'm thinking about Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, because that was the only quote unquote video game that my parents would let me play. But at least, you were doing research and there was a map and there was social studies and there was geography, involved. How can you just make it more engaging, make it fun, and just step back? I think about Elsa from the movie Frozen. Like, adults, let it go. Whatever you don't know, it's okay. 30 years ago, we as the adult needed to pretty much know how to do everything. But now, adults, you're not going to know how to do everything. And if you try, you're just going to be trying and you're probably never going to do anything. So focus on what you're the expert on. And the adults, I think, are the expert on kids, curriculum, and relationships. And I think if you focus on those 3 from a technology standpoint, let the kids take some of those ideas. And then when they have a question, you've built that relationship. You can come in because you know the curriculum and you know the kids, and then you know who needs what. Don't focus on, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this thing on the device. It's okay. Right. They already know how to do it. The kids are basically born now knowing what Bluetooth is. Like, they just kind of go, like, I read an article, like it or not, a lot of babies, their first words are either mom, dad, or Alexa. It's because it's what they hear in their homes. And some people aren't going to like that. Like, oh, I don't like that. Yeah, you know what, though? It's the world that we're living in. Like it or not, it's the world that we're living in. So I think harnessing that is just super important.
Oh, my goodness. You've said so much. Oh, I want to dive into all of what you just said because I had a unique experience last night. I was just this whole idea of 50 educators from 50 states, this whole initiative. And I was looking at the map and I just had one of those moments where I went back to maybe 5th or 6th grade and I'm like, we were just identifying the places on the map. But now in a classroom, we can take a group of kids to that area through Google or whatever else, other device or platform, we can take them there to experience it. So it's not like I'm memorizing something. If we're talking about the northeastern part of our states, we can actually go on the internet, go to YouTube, and experience it, and know what it looks like. I didn't know what it looked like. I just memorized the states and like got up in front of the classroom.
Yeah, well, you memorized it for a few weeks, and then if somebody quizzed you again after the quiz or the test, you probably didn't remember it because memorization is not a thing. First of all, memorization is not a thing that I think any employer is looking for in 2024. It's not going to say on a job application the ability to memorize things. They're going to want you to problem solve, to build relationships, to connect, to collaborate, to get together and solve a problem with a group. And I think, like memorizing states and capitals to me is a complete waste of time. Study our country, study states, study regions, study capitals, but study the why. Like, why are most of our capitals on a river? And I don't think a lot of kids even realize that. And they go, why? Like,
Yeah.
well, I wonder. Like, well, and then one kid's like, well, when were these capitals established? And someone's like,
Established,
oh, a
yeah.
long time ago, before we had planes and cars and Amazon drone delivery. And they're like, oh, that's why. Because if you come to California, nobody flies into Sacramento unless you have family. You're not flying into Sacramento. You fly into LA or San Francisco. And not that that's the only indicator, but it's like not something that actually connects what we think we know about the state. Like, who flies into Jefferson City, Missouri? No, you fly into Kansas City,
No.
you're St. Louis. Like, Jeff City's a
Right.
cool city, but like, why is it the capital? So get deeper on the thing. Like, to your point, don't just look at a map and memorize it and then go, okay, I crammed my brain for the quiz. And then 3 weeks later, you're like, Antoine, what's the capital of Missouri? And you're like, oh man, I can't believe they're asking me this question, and give kids the tools to learn. So then whatever job they are going to have or whatever problem, they have those tools and that mindset to solve the problem. Because I feel like getting kids ready for the jobs that are happening right now is important. But the problem with that is we can't get kids ready for every job, but we can give them the tools and the mindset and I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to figure it out. I have the tools at my disposal to do that. Like my kids, I have 2 middle schoolers, and my kids are learning Spanish, and we've been to Spain and we've been all over the world. And my kids have Apple Watches. Well, my daughter's really into learning Spanish. Unbeknownst to my wife and I, she actually changed her Apple Watch to only understand Spanish. And I was like, what are you doing? She's like, well, I figured, like, if I'm going to really become fluent by high school and take the AP Spanish in high school, I really need to up my language acquisition. So basically, she has her own little translator on her wrist, which to me is just so dang powerful. And I didn't tell her how to do this. My wife and I just provided the tools and the resources, and she figured it out on her own how to do it. So I think that's another great reminder, everybody. Give kids tools, give them some freedom to see what they come up with it. Because if we were like, here's an Apple Watch, all you can do is text mom and dad and these 3 friends. But you know what? We gave her some trust, and we had built relationships, obviously, with our kids, and we gave them some freedom. And now she's like, acquiring Spanish in a much deeper way because on her wrist is a translator, a built-in translator that I didn't even know you could do that with. So her whole computer's in Spanish, her Apple Watch is in Spanish. And I'm like, hey, keep going, kid. That's awesome.
I guess that leads us into our next question about the Adam Welcome podcast. What inspired you to, people have their reasons. Like, what inspired you to start your podcast? And, how do you select your episodes, the topics for your episodes? Like, what do you do?
Yeah. So I've been podcasting for like 15 years. I actually started when I was an elementary principal because I was doing the newsletter, and I had this thought. I'm like, people aren't reading the newsletter. So I ran the analytics on it, and it was like a 13% open rate. So I was spending all this time trying to communicate with my community, and it was, to me, like an outdated way to do it. So I just converted it to a podcast, which was fun. And then, so I had experience with it. And the podcast you're talking about, the Adam Welcome podcast, I think I did like 90 episodes, and it's been on a hiatus. But I have another podcast. It's called School District Leadership, that I talk to leaders all over the country. And I just think, podcasting, it's kind of come full circle. You think about it, like our grandparents, like great grandparents, listened to the radio before TV, and now we have this cool platform where we can record conversations with people, from all over the world. And I just wanted to share my voice and connect with other people. And I think everybody else can do it too. And if you don't know how to start a podcast, just go to Google and type in how to start a podcast. And it's super fun. And you can do low tech, you can do mid tech, you can do high tech. You can record from your, just your headset. You don't need fancy microphones like we have, but just get started and see where it goes.
Right. And that's the unique thing about, seeing this whole wave of podcasting. And I'm like, I'll never do it. And the pandemic hit, and it was like, well, I need to do something because I'm waking up seeing my family every day, every second. And I want to venture into something else.
Yeah.
And with your school leadership podcast, that was my first introduction to you, of seeing you talk to school leaders. And the common guest that we had was Dr. Dale Henson. And you're
Oh yeah.
commenting, yeah, you're telling me that, hey, I actually went and listened to that particular episode, and how you connect with those leaders. So, what, you know, what's your steps towards connecting with leaders? I mean, is it just because your I guess your collaborative audience, your is wide, is broad. So how do you
Yeah.
kind of just narrow down those people?
Yeah, I think that's it's kind of a multi-pronged approach. Some of my guests are people that I know. So the work that I've been doing, excuse me, full time for the last 7 years is, just going all over the country. And I just kind of by accident became a keynote speaker and someone that goes around and does professional development at school districts and principal conferences. So I meet a lot of people that way. I have about 65 events a year. So I see half the country every year. So I see a lot of
Wow.
people, but then also too, you talked about LinkedIn before, I'm connected on LinkedIn. It used to be Twitter. Twitter is not what it was. And
Right.
I don't really spend any time there anymore. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people miss old Twitter, but you know what,
Right.
the world changes and you got to move on. So
Yeah.
like Daryl Henson is a good example. Like I've never met Daryl. I may never meet him in person, but he's somebody that I've been connected with, and looks like an awesome person. And I like what he shares. And just like with us, I send him a message, hey, I have this podcast. I'd love to have you on. Let me know if you're interested. And, it's like probably like, I get like a 65% success rate. Some people don't want to, I just never hear back. Or I think some people just don't check their private messages. So, you don't know unless you ask. So,
Right.
I just reach out and ask people and try to get, a wide array of people from all over the country, and, different large districts, rural districts, suburban, big city districts, just to learn and grow from other people. Like I've had people from like rural Alaska on the podcast, which is cool because, I've done work up in rural Alaska, which is really cool, but we can learn something from everybody. We just gotta start the conversation.
Right. So that's my next that's my next adventure, connecting with someone that's in Alaska. I've reached out to, I've well tried to connect with several in Alaska. So
Cool.
um so this whole idea of you're a leader. I mean, our short conversation right now, you just know leaders, like you just know them. You hear the conversation, you just know what it is, and kind of fluff and all that good stuff, and there's no fluff. And I definitely appreciate it. Now you've been recognized as the principal of the year, 20 to watch by the National School Board Association. How do you define effective instructional educational leadership?
Yeah, I mean, awards and recognition, it feels good. It also feels weird sometimes, but I think it's a good reminder to, everybody listening, recognize your people in an authentic way. I would just start off with that. And yeah, like effective leadership, I feel is like, it's you not doing everything. It's knowing what you're good at and knowing what you're not good at, and empowering the people on your team for what they're good at, because I think leaders need to think about life after them. And I think if
Mm-hmm.
you're not thinking about life after you, and not in a morbid way at all, then you're
Mm-hmm.
not getting your organization ready. It's like parenting.
Mm.
My wife and I, we want our kids to hang out with us, obviously, when they're older, but we want them to not need us. And there's a difference. So I think I try to use that same mindset, from a leadership standpoint. And I think too, just making sure what you're doing is effective and good for kids and good for the adults in your organization. And, leaders have to be looking outside and saying, hey, we should be doing this, or we should be having this conversation. And if there's things that you're doing that aren't relevant anymore, bring them up and have the conversation. Why are we still doing this? Because in schools, it's unique. You can kind of keep doing things even if they're not relevant. But if a business does
Correct.
that, they lose business. And then what happens? They go out of business. And if you don't
Right.
believe me, you can just ask Blockbuster or any other business, that's out
Right.
there, right? Because what happened? Netflix, Amazon
Right.
Prime, Hulu, Peacock, Apple Plus, YouTube. I mean, all the things, right? Like they thought that they were gonna, or they thought that they would last long enough. So just, be consistent, be authentic, know what you're not good at, and be okay with that. And that's just called humility. And it's also empowering your people. Do the things, only do the things that only you can do. If somebody else can do it, let them do it. And there will be times when you got to jump in and do it. That's fine. But I think day in, day out, if somebody else can do it and it's not overloading them, let them do it. What does that do? That builds capacity. It's like why kids should have chores and why kids should make their own bed and
Right.
why, like my kids make their own lunch, I think it's that kind of mindset. So I also would say too, to be an effective leader, you have to be reading. I read like 50 books a year. And if you're not reading books about leadership and not just in education, I just think you're doing yourself a disservice. Business leadership, military leadership, I'm sure I've never read any, but like faith-based leadership, I'm sure it's really, really powerful. Leadership from people throughout history. So you can learn about what worked and then what didn't work. So then we can learn from them. And if you're just not reading books, I think you're doing yourself and your organization a disservice because you're just, you're not adding to it. Being on social media and connecting with people is great, but being able to dive deeper into a book is super valuable.
Oh, I agree. In fact, I'm looking at now. I'm not at the 50. Now I'm not going to get on it, like the kids say. Well, they use another term, but and pretend. But I know the importance of reading, even as if you're going as if your background is in professional development, or you're a consultant, you're considered the expert, and you have to stay up on your on your craft, because if you go into a place and they already, well, pause there. So you've really kind of laid out this whole idea of advice for inspiring school leaders. um I want to kind of shift to our next question is you know you've touched on it in many points today of the evolution of the educational landscape. What do you envision some challenges and opportunities for educators in this next decade?
Yeah, I think there's too many things happening in school that we should just not be doing anymore. And I know that's a hard thing to kind of think about. Like, I think there's a TMS problem, too many standards. I feel like we're probably still teaching things that are just not relevant anymore. I'm not going to say anything, just I don't want to upset anybody, but there's like, why are we still teaching this, and where is that in the world, or why are we teaching it to that level or that depth? Because I think what everybody probably wants more of is just time. Time
Right.
is the commodity that everybody wants more of. And
Correct.
why are we doing things that just aren't happening anymore? Like, if you think about from like a sports standpoint, if new research comes out, so like, okay, I live in the Bay Area. I'm a big Warriors fan. Stephen Curry, the greatest 3-point shooter of all time,
Ever.
right? Ever, right? And like, if research shows that there's a drill that maybe he's been doing for 3 years that's maybe not as effective anymore from a strength standpoint, from like an eating, a working out, a watching film, do you know what happens? Him and his team stop doing that thing and they start doing the other thing that is more effective. And that's going to help them win games and win more championships and do all those things. And like, I know that the Golden State Warriors have a lot more resources and he probably has like 7 coaches just for him. But that same concept, like, why are we still doing things? And like, we just keep adding things without taking things away. And, I don't want to just complain without offering a strategy. So for me, a strategy is, everybody listening, whatever you do in your job, try to write down everything that you do, within reason.
Yeah.
And then give it a number, like either like a 1 through a 5. Like you think, oh, like, I don't know, this is a 1. I don't know why we're doing it anymore. 5 is like, yeah, we should be doing it. So kind of rate everything. And then I would say force rank the most important things. So if you wrote down 77 things, there's one 1 and there's
Right.
177. Because if everything's important, nothing's important. And you say it's important and you say you love it and you love that lesson and you love that project and you love doing this thing. Or Steph Curry's like, man, I love doing this drill. And his team's like, Steph, it doesn't do anything for you. Stop. We have other things. And he's like, okay, cool. Like, or like you don't have time with your 3-hour workout. Force rank the things, because when you're forced to force rank things, you force yourself to say, this is more important than that, or this is that. And you don't have time probably to do 77 things. You can probably do 21 things. And I just give that as like a strategy, just as an example. Number it 1 through 5, give it a rating, force rank some kind, just start doing it. You're not going to perfect the system, but I think going back to the original question is that is going to help people, educators, leaders, superintendents think about the things that they're doing, why, the efficacy, how deep, how far, is it relevant anymore? Should we put more money towards this? Should we take money away from this? Because, and especially with AI, Antoine, like there's so many new programs and things, and like, oh my gosh, do this thing, it's going to be great. And you're like, well, is it? Like, is it proven? Can I sustain it, or can I just do it for 3 months and then I have to cut it off? So do it as an individual, and then do it as a team, and then do it as a bigger team. So try to like tier the conversations. I mean, my wife and I do this. We're like, we can't do everything. We can't do 5 sports for each of our kids. So we're like, what can we afford? What's most important? What do we have time for? Some exercise like that, I think, is important for educators to go through.
Oh, that's powerful. And I think school leaders, need to do that going into the into the new school year. No, this conversation has been rich and relevant. Again, it's striking something up in me as just an educator. Forget all the other things that I do. Just hearing about innovation. That's just what I take away from this conversation: innovation. And the last part I give the guests I call it the 2-minute warning. In my background, I've coached football, and you have the 2-minute warning or whatever. So you don't necessarily have to take 2 minutes, but the last couple of minutes is you, and we will close it out.
Yeah. So I started writing, like I travel quite a bit. I had like 130 flights this year in 2024. So, I'm home a lot, but I also do travel quite a bit. And I started writing my kids little notes on Post-it notes, just like little ideas that I wanted to give them. And I put them on their mirror they have a big mirror in their bathroom. And finally they couldn't see themselves. So we've like transferred the Post-it notes. And there's one that I want to just read to the audience that I think is really important. If you do only one thing, make sure you hustle. Because I feel like if you do only one thing, make sure you hustle. Because you may not be the fastest, you may not be the smartest or the brightest or the most prepared or know everything about the thing that you're doing. But if you hustle, people around you are going to see that energy and that motivation and that will to learn the thing. Like Coach Krzyzewski, who coached at Duke for like, I don't know, 30 plus years. There's a quote from him: I will take a 2-star recruit that has the hustle and the motivation and everything over a 5-star recruit that is, for lack of a better term, like lazy. So if you do one thing, make sure you hustle, because you'll learn as you go. You'll impress people as you go through that, as you're learning. And whatever you don't know, the hustle will help make up for those deficiencies, and you'll learn what you don't know as you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Love Coach K. He's the guy.
Yep.
All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. This concludes the podcast with Mr. Adam Welcome. When I think about making a connection with people, it's all about finding those that are able to sharpen your tool. And he has done just that. I just feel the passion. I feel the leadership that's in him. And I'm excited on just the continued conversations that we'll have. Now, share this with a friend. Let them know it's some powerful information that has gone across this podcast show. All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. We are out.